What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So now that the Toronto Maple Leafs have sadly been eliminated from the 2025 playoffs, all eyes in that market turn to Mitch Marner in his unrestricted free agency this summer. And in my opinion, I talked about it in last night's video, unless he's willing to take some kind of like 8-year deal, sub $12 million, a decently team-friendly deal, at least in the regular season, you cannot bring him back if you're Brad Treliving. So I'm deciding to go through what I think are the top 10 best/most realistic free agency destinations for Mitch Marner. What this is going to be based on is factors like, first off, do they have the salary cap to potentially afford a $13 million Mitch Marner, at least $12 million? How good are they right now? Mitch Marner, although heading the free agency market, he can't expect to go to some top tier contender. I'm sure he doesn't want to go to a team that's in the middle of a deep rebuild or something like that. Do the teams want Marner or need Marner? Are they trying to, because in my opinion, if you're signing Mitch Marner, you're probably a team that is having trouble to make the playoffs or maybe hasn't got over the hump in the playoffs. If you have prior playoff success and you have guys that rise to the occasion, you don't need a Mitch Marner. So yeah, we are going to go through these teams. First off, I'm going to show you the teams that just did not make the cut, in my opinion, for a bunch of reasons. That top row, those teams have all had playoff success relatively recently. They don't have a ton of cap space when looking at their salary cap structure. They don't want Mitch Marner. The second row, Washington Capitals, I just don't think you do such a splash. I think you just run it back with this same team. I talked about them in a video a couple days ago. Vancouver, I don't think Mitch Marner really wants to go there too much right now. They're kind of in chaos. Ottawa, he's not going from Toronto to Ottawa, and they don't have a ton of salary cap space. Winnipeg, not the biggest free agency destination spot. Calgary, kind of doing a retool/rebuild right now. Nashville's a total shit show. And Buffalo is Buffalo. So those are how many teams that I put in that tier. That's 12 that I'm just not considering when it comes to this top 10. But without further ado, let's get into it. And up first, I got the Boston Bruins. Yes, they already have a superstar right winger that does perform in the playoffs to a decent degree in David Pastrnak. Still, you take Mitch Marner in a heartbeat. Yes, maybe he's not that legit number one center, but you're probably going to have to trade a shit ton of assets to get that number one center versus Mitch Marner in free agency. And he would so clearly be the second best forward on this team. Last year, towards the end of the season, it was like Morgan Geekie was their second best forward. And talking about $12 to $13 million, they just gave $12.75 million last offseason to Lindholm and Zadorov, and it would be, they have $28 million of salary cap space this summer because they traded Brad Marchand, so they have the money to do that. They have some unrestricted and restricted free agents that they got to sign, but really none too notable besides Mason Lohrei and Morgan Geekie, so they're going to have the money to do it. They got to be aggressive. Don Sweeney, although he's returning for next season, he's probably on somewhat of a hot seat, and you're not going to, for free, besides salary cap space, be able to acquire a player of Mitch Marner's caliber. And knowing the Toronto Maple Leafs, they'd face the Boston Bruins the next season if Mitch Marner went there, and Mitch Marner would dominate in a Game 7. So in the 10th place spot is the Boston Bruins. In 9th, I got my New York Islanders. I know you probably assumed me to have them like top 5. I got to be somewhat realistic. Pre-Lamoriello firing and pre-draft lottery, they wouldn't even be a top 15 team when it comes to it. But it's actually it's somewhat appealing coming to New York. It's a reverse Tavares. Obviously, that would be awesome for the league, for Islanders fans. The Islanders do have $28 million of salary cap space. They do have some restricted and unrestricted free agents like Dobson, Romanov, Palmieri, Holmstrom, Saplakov. I think if you're able to dump JG Pajot's one more year at $5 million, you would have the money to bring in a Mitch Marner and potentially trade Noah Dobson. And when looking at it for the Islanders, they bring in Marner, they draft most likely Schaefer, maybe even Misa, or maybe potentially Misa instead of Schaefer. And then if one of Yzerman or Ritchie really hit, I'm not saying next year they're going to be some fantastic team, but in the late 2020s, the second half of the decade, they could be a solid team. They could be a solid playoff team. And this core obviously has some playoff success. I think it's somewhat of an appetizing option for Mitch Marner, and I think the Islanders definitely should be interested in bringing such a player to the island. In 8th, the Chicago Blackhawks. When looking at this, I still think even if they sign Mitch Marner, they're a year or two away from making the playoffs, another 3 to 4 years from contending at a high level, but they got to give Connor Bedard something, and they could offer all the money in the world to Mitch Marner. They could offer him $13.5 million. So in looking at them, they have a large quantity of prospects that in, again, 2 to 3 years could really pan out. They could be something special. It's a little risky from Marner because, again, he's signing up to probably not be a playoff team for at least a season, probably 2 seasons. But if he wants to go at the bag, he's still going to somewhat of a big, critical, to a degree, market, not the same as Toronto, but an original 6 franchise. I think it would be a pretty solid snag by the Blackhawks, who are definitely still trying to take that next step in their rebuild and get out of the bottom three of the NHL. Next up at number 7, the LA Kings. This would be an interesting situation cap space wise. They have $23 million of cap space with 2 notable free agents, some other guys in terms of their bottom 6 that they need to sign. Gavrikov, he's going to want $7.5 million, just how good he was this season. And Lafreniere, after really breaking out, is going to want on a long-term deal like $6 million. So they might have to trade someone else to kind of create that cap space or not re-sign one of those guys. So it's not the most likely realistic situation, but Marner potentially going to the LA Kings would be electric in terms of a team that has been a consistent playoff team, just needs to get over that hump. Maybe from the LA Kings perspective, Ken Holland would love to bring in a guy like Mitch Marner. It is a little bit they're kind of like the West Coast Leafs to a degree, losing 4 straight years to the Edmonton Oilers. But in terms of bringing in top end talent, Mitch Marner would be their best option this summer. Number 6, the Detroit Red Wings. Stay in the Atlantic, stay somewhat close to Toronto, and go to a team that's trying to come out of a rebuild, doesn't have Toronto level expectations quite yet. If they sign Mitch Marner, they should have the salary cap space roughly $21 million with no real notable free agents because they were able to lock up Raymond and Seider on such good deals. Larkin's only making 8.7. DeBrincat's making 7.8 the next 2 seasons. So they're in a solid spot salary cap wise. They have some bad contracts coming off the books. Their forward core would be legit playoff level, besides maybe the second line center position next season. If they had a Mitch Marner, the defense core still not quite there, as well as the goaltenders, but the prospects are there to be a legit team in 2 years from now, be a safe playoff team. So it's pretty appetizing for Mitch Marner. I think Steve Yzerman definitely has somewhat of a hot seat and needs to make the playoffs next year, so they should definitely take a swing. And for Marner, they could be a high-level team competing with the Toronto Maple Leafs in no time. Number 5, the Minnesota Wild. Now, when looking at them, maybe not the most realistic, similarly to LA. This summer, they could swing it, but the next season, they're going to have Gustafsson and Kaprizov being pending unrestricted free agents, or I think Gustafsson's a restricted free agent, so they're going to have to budget for that. But if they're not too keen on bringing back Marco Rossi, they offered him a 5x5 in the middle of the season. He said no, rightfully so. That's money that they're going to have to spend this summer. And when looking at it, he definitely fits their age core, same age as guys like Joel Eriksson and Kirill Kaprizov. You sign a guy like Danil Yurov, you sign him to his ELC. He's your second line center of the future, potentially playing with a guy like Mitch Marner from Minnesota. They got money to spend. Why not make a splash potentially and go after Mitch Marner? To the top 4, we got the Anaheim Ducks at number 4, a team that took a big step this season, but it was really just the goaltending. They have a metric shit ton of money, $38 million in cap space. They do have to re-sign Dostal and McTavish this summer. Next summer, Lacombe and Carlson are going to be restricted free agents. But again, $38 million. They have more than enough money to potentially get this done. And when looking at it from a Marner perspective, young, exciting, up-and-coming team, you go from being in Toronto, maybe the biggest media market for hockey, to being the second biggest NHL team in LA, probably like the 10th or 11th biggest NHL. Like UCLA, USC football is more covered than the Anaheim Ducks. Nothing against the Anaheim Ducks, but it would be the polar opposite for the most part, both weather, media, and pressure expectations-wise. And I think in 2 to 3 years, they can be a high-level team. And I think adding someone like Mitch Marner under a new coach, Joel Quenneville, really could excite the fan base in terms of them maybe potentially being a playoff team as soon as next season. Number 3, the Columbus Blue Jackets, a young, exciting team with good forward core, bringing in that legit superstar in Mitch Marner would be awesome to see. When looking at them, yes, they have some contracts that they're going to pay relatively soon, but they have, I believe, $40 million in salary cap this summer. They got enough money for Mitch Marner, and I think after they proved that they're a legit threat to make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference, I thought they were going to be pretty bad. You take a swing on a guy like Mitch Marner. When looking at when they landed Johnny Gaudreau back in 2023, that was just Jarmo Kekalainen like grasping at straws. The team was not nearly good enough to make the playoffs to truly compete. They're in a really good spot right now with their young core. Why not add a guy like Mitch Marner to potentially get you into the playoffs? Again, Mitch Marner maybe chokes in the playoffs, but a lot of these teams, like a Columbus throughout their history, just trying to make the playoffs, just trying to be a consistent playoff team. They don't have the same expectations as the Austin Matthews Leafs in year 8. So when looking at Columbus, I think that'd be a really good fit. Number 2, the team that is still alive right now, the Carolina Hurricanes, $29.3 million of salary cap space, and their only unrestricted free agents are Burns, Orlov, Roslovic, Robinson, and Stahl. They could bring back like 3 or 4 of those guys and still have like $19 million to spend on Mitch Marner. This is definitely the best fit for Marner in terms of contending throughout the entire duration of his career, because Carolina is still pretty damn young, still have a very good prospect pool. Speaking of, they're going to let some of those guys be able to walk because they have Nicky Shin next year, Scott Morrow, Bradley Nadeau. They're in such an awesome situation. Jarvis, Aho, Svechnikov, Slavin all locked up on great deals for the most part. The only problem is, I think if Carolina loses to Florida and they have offensive issues, I think Carolina jumps to number one for this because they need to bring in a difference maker, at least in the regular season. Hopefully he can turn around in the playoffs. Offensively, if they do make the Stanley Cup final and put up a good battle or win the Stanley Cup, they probably aren't too interested in Marner. They'll probably just bring in more so depth guys to supplement some secondary scoring because their core guys prove that they're good enough to win come Stanley Cup final. So it's really going to depend on what the interest is for the Carolina Hurricanes in this situation. Would they want someone like Mitch Marner that I think really would be a good fit for a Rod Brindamore, more so defensive system? Yeah, Marner's a great two-way player and would be a great fit in Carolina. Also, it'd be hilarious if he denied the Rantanen trade and then just went there for free. Leafs fans, he would truly be the most hated Leaf of all time after that. And then at number one, no surprise here. It's by far the Utah Mammoth in terms of these two parties coming together. Again, Carolina, if they badly want Mitch Marner, makes all the sense. They're probably number one, but Utah is going to be big game hunting this summer. They have $23 million of salary cap space with no real notable unrestricted or restricted free agents. Yes, they have a Cooley extension next year that I think on July 1st, you offer him an 8x8 and just let him grow into that. But yeah, they're trying to make a splash in their first year as the Mammoth. Their owner is ultra aggressive. They got guys like Keller, Gunther, Sergachev, Dursey all locked up at very reasonable cap hits. Money's not an issue with this. And they have the 4th overall pick. And they almost made the playoffs, but they were they were a 90-point team, 91-point team, missed it by 5-6 points, and they're so young. Got the 4th overall pick, already mentioned that, but if some of their prospects in the pool right now hit, there's no reason why this team can't be a playoff team. If they got Marner, they would jump St. Louis for sure for me next season, and I think the following season they could easily be a contender with Mitch Marner. They're just in such a good situation, and they have the money too. And again, going from Toronto, big media, a lot of pressure, to Utah, Marner would be treated like a goddamn god, and I think it makes all the sense in the world. But let's go through it again. Boston was first. Islanders. Then we got Chicago, Los Angeles Kings, Detroit, Minnesota, Anaheim, Columbus, Carolina, Utah. Also, I'm going to go over some of the teams that did not make it that I didn't eliminate at the start. We're going to go through that right now. St. Louis, they only have $6 million in salary cap space. Maybe they can move around some money and make it work, but just not feasible right now. Seattle, I would not trust Ron Francis to get that done. Maybe he'd offer $14-15 million, but I don't want to go there if I'm Marner. The New Jersey Devils, I think you just keep it with your top 3 forwards and hope that you're healthy next season, Jack Hughes in particular. Philadelphia, not sure Marner's loving to be coached by Rick Tocchet potentially, and they're still a little bit of away. Pittsburgh, yes, Kyle Dubas is there, but they're entering some kind of rebuild retool. Montreal, just roll with your forwards. They're good enough right now. Don't bring in Mitch Marner. San Jose, I think they have one more year of sucking, especially when the draft looks so good next year, and I wouldn't rush it by bringing in Mitch Marner at this point. Vegas, they could move some money to make something work, something insane like that. It wouldn't shock me, but right now they don't have the money to do that. And New York only has $8 million with Keandre Miller and Will Cooley being restricted free agents. So they'd have to move out Artemi Panarin or Trocheck or something like that. They'd have to move around a lot of money, and that's not going to happen this offseason. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about this list? Who would you move up? Who would you move down? Who would you put on? Who would you take out? I'll be seeing the next one.